To kick off this new season of M3, we're gonna need some mushrooms. And I think I might just know where we can find some.
I need some mushrooms for today. I want to make a talisman to keep the bad juju away. But what do you do when you can't find any outside? Oh, I know just where to go. It's called Walmart. All the coolest witches buy their gear at Walmart. Don't believe everything you hear. I guess this'll have to do. Yeah, I guess it'll have to do.
Now, what the fuck do I do with it? I wish I could talk to someone who knows a lot about turning mushrooms into magical talismans. Maybe someone that's an expert on animism. Probably somebody that's written a book about it, too. Operator, connect me to Nathan Hall. Welcome to Music, Myth, and Magic. I'm Eric Arcadian, and today I am speaking to Nathan M. Hall. Nathan is a witch, animist, an initiate of the Anderson Feri Tradition, and a member of the Temple of Witchcraft. He's also the author of the book Path of the Moonlit Hedge, which we'll be talking more about in just a little bit. Nathan, thank you so much for being on the show with me today.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
Well, to get started with some questions, can you tell me a little bit about how you got started on your path?
Yeah, it's a long story. I think for most of us in the witchcraft community, it is a little bit of a long story. There's always callbacks to some event in childhood. I didn't have any one particular event, but I always, mention that, where I grew up, it was a very small town surrounded by cornfields, built on top of an abandoned coal mine. And I feel like there's like something about town like coal mining towns or mining towns where maybe it's something to do with just the pulling out, and of the earth, and like the violation of the earth or whatever, tends to have a lot of like spirit activity around it. Just about every house that I lived in, or friend's house that I visited, grandparents' houses, all had some kind of weird haunting thing going on. And that kind of shaped my childhood. I remember some of my earliest memories are of seeing a woman in my bedroom when I was still in my crib, who wasn't there, or wasn't in flesh, I should say, there. And also there were a lot of people who had the sort of lights in the sky encounters, UFO or whatever you want to call them. It's hard to categorize what it might be, but many people in my family and other families had these encounters in this really small, remote area of the country. I think now the population in my hometown is 600. It was, in boom times, when I was a teenager, it was 1,200. So it's a small area. But yeah, that was kind of the setup for my spiritual interaction with the world. And I feel like a lot of it just comes out of like humans have the capacity to interact with the spirit world. We just kind of shut ourselves off to it. So I feel like it's always there, and it's always accessible to us. Maybe not as in your face as it was in my childhood, but still very, very active and able to be interacted with. And it wasn't until I was in, I feel like I was born an animist in a lot of ways, just, interacting with the wild world, interacting with nature. And it wasn't until I was really in my teens that I kind of stumbled upon Raymond Buckland's Big Blue Book, and also found a copy of the Satanic Bible and one of my friend's parents' collections of books. So I, got into all, not really got into, but dove into that because it was so just strange and completely unique compared to the sort of things that I had been used to interacting with. And I found a lot of resonance with Buckland's book, and not so much with LeVay's, but to each their own.
What would you say drew you in particular? I know you said you feel like you were born an animist. What made you feel like that? And what is animism exactly?
So animism is a lot of things to a lot of people. And I feel like trying to put words to it sort of automatically you are cutting out parts of it that should be included. But it's essentially that in my view, it's that everything is inspirited. Everything has a spirit. And with that, I am able to make connections with those spirits and to, ask them for help, try to create partnerships, whatever it is. But it's seeing everything, from the universe itself as an animate being that is way beyond my comprehension. But and things like black holes, stars, planets, and just all the way down to rocks and streams and forests, trees, and down to like particles. So it's the range is inclusive of everything that is material and immaterial, and it makes for a very sometimes it can feel like a very crowded universe, but you also have to sort of use discernment to sort of protect yourself from the overwhelm of the spirit world that can be there. But yeah, and in the past, I always said, animism is kind of like the source code of the universe. And I still kind of feel that way, but I don't love that description as much anymore, especially with all the AI stuff that's coming out. I'm just not a big fan. And AI has its own spirit, and I think it's, my guess is that it's kind of a trickster spirit in some ways, and maybe even I've seen like memes on Facebook about like when you are looking for to see if a picture is AI generated, count the fingers, and and the same kind of advice is given to people when you're having an encounter with a fairy being, a fae being. Like look for the things, the subtle things that you might not, like immediately pick up on, like number of fingers that they have, or are they dressed in a certain way that seems off, those kind of things. But yeah, source code of the universe kind of captures it, but it feels a little too mechanistic for me now. And I'm looking for more of a organic feeling definition that captures the same idea. But yeah.
So is it possible to be an animist and a polytheist?
I think so. I think it's possible to be an animist and an atheist as well. Like, I think that, polytheism we work with lots of gods. I think gods are part of the, the spirits that inhabit our universe. I don't have any. I have like. Sometimes I wonder if the gods were responsible for manifesting us, or if we are responsible for manifesting them, which I know would be to some people would be a heretical statement, but those are the sorts of things that I wonder about because of the attachment to humanity that the gods seem to have, but yeah, I think in the sort of scale of the infinite scale of animism that the gods flow right into that. So yeah, I would say so. And they don't have. I mean, if you don't believe in the power of the god of certain gods or any gods, you can still be an animist. And see the inspirited nature of the universe, or at least the energetic signature of the universe that seems to flow through all matter.
Okay, very interesting. So the term is not really mutually exclusive to any other belief system. You said you could even be an atheist and be an animist, which is really interesting.
Right.
If somebody is looking for ways to get started with an animist practice or to incorporate animist beliefs within their existing practice, how would they maybe get started?
I would say, okay, one of the best things you can do is, like, if you have a favorite author in the witchcraft world, there's a very high chance that they have included animistic things already in their text, but they just haven't centered it as a central part of the practice. So you can start to see the breadcrumbs of it for almost all of modern witchcraft, as far as I can tell. I always see it pop up, but it's always like like when you're working with spell components, when you're working with crystals, people always have a very animist kind of interaction with their stones on their altar, sort of tapping into the energy, that the natural energy fields that these things create. To me, that's part of the spirit of that stone or whatever other object that you're working with. But yeah, so I think you can find it already in all of your favorite witchcraft authors, but the way that you can start to cultivate it more deeply is doing the weird things. We're witches, so or a lot of us are, and it would be abnormal if we were not doing the weird things, like talking to your plants. That's a great way, and it's an easy way to sort of open your mind to the idea of how to work in an animist framework. And then you can start building from there. You can start working. One of the things that I'm writing about in my new book is just this idea, and it's an old idea that has been around for centuries and centuries, of walking the land. Everybody, landowners historically would go and walk their land, so they would have a sense of, do I have a fence that needs repaired? Is there a problem, with some kind of fungus on my crops? Is there, just looking and observing, and doing that as part of your spiritual practice. So spiritually walking the land. I mean, get out and physically do it, but also open up your, psychic senses, open up your spiritual side, see what's there and resonant in that sort of magical space, and how you can start working with that and incorporating that. Those are sort of some of the baby steps, I would say. And I always, like, in all my workshops, my biggest recommendation for people is just observe. When you go out into the wild, if you go out to a park, if you go out just for a walk, I mean, here in West Palm, we have a lot of really good nature trails that kind of go through swampy areas and give you access to some very rough feeling areas, but they're very close and accessible. And going out into these places and opening up your senses and observing what's there, and you might be surprised because, I mean, even now I go out and, I've been doing this for a long time, and sometimes I'll just be like, oh, there's something moving through, and there's, I'll get like a full body, like goosebumps and then it's gone. And it's like something was just kind of moving through the area. So doing the observation, and then being able to keep yourself safe. So I always treat these encounters, spirit encounters or of any variety, as if I'm encountering a dangerous wild animal. I don't know what it's going to do. I don't know what its motives are. I don't know if it's hungry. I don't know if it's cranky. And I treat every encounter with that. So with the care and consideration that you would if you were going through bear country. The first thing I do is just I walk through. I sort of make a little bit of noise so that I'm not just coming up on anything unawares. And over time, over many successive sessions, I'll start to build up a relationship with whatever being I'm encountering, if I want to, and if it gives me a good sign back. But yeah, that's sort of my encountering spirits from an animist perspective 101 that I walk people through at workshops that I do.
Well, I like the walk the land metaphor. It sounds really a lot to me like being spiritually open and aware and present wherever you are, and just
Absolutely.
to kind of see what's around you. Something that you mentioned, it reminded me of something that you wrote in the book when you were talking about crystals just a moment ago, and I can't remember if you were talking about crystals in the book when you said this, but it was something adjacent to that, I believe. And you were talking about a cow and a happy cow. Uh-huh. Can you allow? Do you remember that section? It was like getting milk from the happy cow is better than just from a utility cow.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you have a relationship with a spirit, with an animal like a cow, and you treat it well, and the milk that you get will be healthier. It will be like, and that's like provable science, that if you feed an animal well, if you take care of it and you support it, not only just physically, but emotionally, and give it a good life, it's going to produce better results for you in the milk. And sort of the milk of our spiritual encounters is the benefits that we get from incorporating spirits that are happy with us into our work. So if it is, crystals, if it is, like mugwort or whatever, something that you have a relationship with, and that you have an ongoing positive interaction with, will always yield better results. And I generally will use and resort to those spirit partnerships for myself, rather than taking a correspondence from a book. I might still look at the book to see what the correspondences that they recommend are, but then I might change that and see, okay, well, does that sort of have an equivalence to how I interact with this other being, And you can do that for things like wormwood and mugwort. They're related. they're in the same family. But you can also like do that for like correspondences of things that have other resonance, like that are not so closely related. Even subbing out, like if you had citrine, if a spell that you had called for using citrine, incorporating citrine. Well, I don't have any citrine right now, but I have a lot of rosemary, and the sort of positive, warm, happy feelings associated with both, I could see easily substituting those. And I have a long-standing relationship with rosemary that that I've cultivated over a number of years, and so it would work probably better than just going out to a gem shop and picking up a citrine and dropping it into my spell. So yeah, I forgot about my cow story.
I stumped you.
Yeah.
Well, that's really interesting. I almost always feel like personal resonance trumps, whatever correspondence that you read in a book. But usually when I think about it, it's like substituting other herbs for an herb that's written in a recipe. And I usually don't think about like a cross substitution of using another material entirely, like a crystal being called for somewhere and using an herb instead of a crystal. That's fascinating. Are there any other examples that you can think of?
Well, I would say the caution being that assess what the utility of what this is included in the spell for. Crystals tend to be more long lasting than plant material. So if you're intending to do something that has a longer lifespan, you may need to find a different substitute, that is more appropriate. But yeah, I think that I think it's all based on necessity. If you are, and a little bit of that comes out of like my kitchen witchery. I spent a lot of time. I spend so much time in the kitchen. I'm in there for, I make breakfast, lunch, and dinner for my family every day. So, and a lot of that is just like, prior to doing that, I worked in like restaurants and kitchens and restaurants, and figuring out good substitutes for things on the fly when the pressure is on is sort of, you just have to do it. You have to figure that out quickly. And I feel like that's sort of where that came from for me. Like, oh, I don't know what, flavor that marjoram would impart, but I see it used a lot in recipes with oregano. So maybe I can use oregano, and the flavor profile might be a little different, but it'll be it's similar, and it'll have the effect that I'm going for if I'm putting it into a pasta sauce or something like that, But yeah, so I would say, my recommendation is always experiment, always observe. I don't think that there are a lot of, there are some hard and fast rules when it comes to magic, but once you know them, like, magic is like music, it's like jazz. It's like, you can do a lot of improv and have some great success and sometimes some, terrible off notes or whatever. And you learn and move forward from there. But I think as long, my thing is always, as long as you're doing it respectfully, as long as you're, taking into account the impacts that you're having on the relationships that you have with these different material, the spirits of those, then you're probably okay. So yeah, I think get out and get dirty. Like, I love gardening, I love cooking, and there's so much improvisation in that. I'm terrible at baking, and for probably obvious reasons, since I have a hard time sticking to recipes as written, But
That's funny. You initially went for the cooking metaphor, and my mind pretty much instantly went to a musical metaphor. Not just like improvisation, but if we have a melody line that we're trying to accomplish in a piece of music, I could play it on guitar, or I could play it on piano, or we could do something weird like a synth or a drum line, and maybe we would accomplish the same thing, get the idea across. But maybe there's a particular reason that we're using that instrument for a specific timbre or sound quality that needs to be there for the magic to happen. So it's it's a very interesting way of looking at things there. Now, in addition to animism, you're part of the Feri tradition and you're part of the Temple of Witchcraft, and I'm curious what you have kind of pulled most from these different sources.
I think at this point in my craft, it's hard to pull out the different threads. I would say that what the Temple of Witchcraft is a surprisingly complete education magically. I started the first year of the Temple of Witchcraft mystery school, I think in 2015. And I was like, I'll try it out. We'll see. I was like, there's some areas that I'm rough in, but I'm more or less there. And it just taught me like, oh, how little I knew. So yeah, like, and it just continued to be that way year after year. I was like, oh, I know, the second year is more of the year of doing spell work and ritual and things like that. And I was like, I'm pretty adept at this. And no, like there was so much that I had not considered about the craft as it related in that sense. So I love the Temple of Witchcraft. I love Christopher Penzak. I mean, Christopher Penzak wrote the foreword to my book. So clearly I love the temple. And I think that it just gave such a good education, and it continued. Like I'm still taking courses with them. But when I encountered Feri for the first time, I had been like in this very like learning space, like very school-like setting, learning, and I encountered Feri, and it was like all of a sudden it just like awakened my animist heart. It was like this like little voice that was like calling from the wild or something. And the person who became my teacher, I met him at a Temple of Witchcraft Temple Fest one year, and I was like, whatever energetic thing you've got going on, I need that. He's like, well, I'm a Feri initiate, and like this is kind of what it's about, and like let me know if you ever want to try it out. And a couple years later, I ended up doing it, and I think that, like I said, Feri has a lot of my experience of Feri, and I feel like a lot of people's experiences are different based on their teachers, based on their own sort of spiritual makeup. But mine reacted and resonated very well with this sort of sense of connection to something more wild. And at the time when I was journaling about it, I was like, it feels like learning how to become feral in some ways, taking your awakening your spiritual senses to a more close to nature, close to the source of magic kind of place. And it continues to be probably generative force for me in my magic now. Especially since initiating almost 2 years ago at this point. It is central. It is absolutely essential to my worldview, and it's really probably what got me to write my book in the first place. When I was in all of this, as I've said, the animist thing is always kind of there. It's sprinkled throughout everything, but it's never centrally focused. And in my fairy training, I didn't even find a strong animist bend necessarily in it, but I found the space to express that and to explore that during the process of my training. And it really awakened that within me, and it led me to want to write my book and the book that I'm writing right now as well.
Well, that it almost sounds like they each appealed to like a different side of you, and kind of like they both became like two puzzle pieces that just fit together really well.
I know, as a Taurus, I'm very grounded, but and I feel like I've got Taurus many times in my chart, but I also have Pisces many times in my chart, and I feel like there's some there's some interplay happening there, where I'm like constantly trying to satisfy the intellectual side of myself, but also wanting to scream naked under the moon and go crazy and have ecstatic experience as part of my craft, so.
Okay. So you just talked about screaming under the moon, going crazy. A minute ago, you mentioned kind of going wild. I remember that, you know, there's a whole chapter in your book about rewilding the soul. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah. So a lot of it is just trying to, it's hard to talk about without talking about the healing process up front, because a lot of, when you're getting into ecstatic practice, you can get into dangerous spaces easily and accidentally. So when I talk about rewilding the soul, I'm always front loading it with, please be working on your path of healing. Please, magically work, through parts of your shadow that are holding you back. Also work with a therapist or a professional who has experience dealing with people who have emotions. I think everybody could benefit from therapy, whether or not you feel well put together or like a mess. It doesn't matter, because being in a human body and having all of the chemicals and hormones and things that are surging through, and all of the external stimulus that we have, and it's a lot to manage, and we're going through extremely interesting times. So even the most grounded and sort of well put together person is needs to have an outlet for these things and needs to process these things, because otherwise they become these schisms in yourself and can potentially become dangerous parts of your personality that, especially if you're suppressing them or pushing them away, they really can become empowered parts of your shadow that you are not bringing out into the daylight, dealing with sort of whatever it is that has triggered this, and giving it some love, giving that shadow part of yourself the love and the air to breathe, so that it can really reintegrate into your whole self. after that, and I don't think that's an ongoing process for all of us. We're never, any of us, completely healed. I don't think. I don't feel like there's a lot of bodhisattvas walking around, but maybe there's a few, and maybe they've healed everything and attained some sort of enlightenment. But generally, you're going to be working on that forever. But having a process for working on that, having a routine for working on that, having a routine for general cleansing, grounding, and being in touch with all parts of yourself is super important. And then when you have those tools, you can start doing the more rewilding process. And to me, rewilding is really how I communicate it to people, is that it is touching that animist part of yourself. It is letting it come back out, and realizing that humans are not separate. We are not separate from any of the other, beings that exist on this planet, and that we need to open up and engage and try to heal the sort of partnerships that we've had at some point in our past, humans had, and that we've forgotten about as we became more and more materially focused, more and more monotheist, I would dare to say. Although I don't think, even in the classical period, it wasn't like it was a magical time where we were just in harmony with all of nature or anything like that. There was plenty of issues, from classical Greece and that sort of era. But I think it really is about, like, creating partnerships, opening your awareness to the entities that exist throughout the world, and really listening. Like, I feel like as witches, we are constantly these mediators who walk into liminal space, and we do it for ourselves, we do it for our communities, we do it for people who come to us and just ask for help. Whether you're reading tarot or doing spell work for somebody, this is sort of the liminal job of the witch. So being able to do that successfully, for me, includes listening the other way as well. We're not just listening to the humans who are coming to us for the work that we can do, but we also need to be listening to the spirits and what they need, and what we can do to attempt to repair some of the damage in the broken agreements that we've made with them as a species. So yeah, that's a really long-winded way of answering your question, but yeah, it's challenging work, and it is rewarding work, and it can sometimes not feel worth it, and other times it is like you get the sense that this is the purpose, that so many witches have been sent here for. Why witchcraft itself may be awakening as a modern need, as filling the sort of zeitgeist of the era of connecting to the natural world, and having somebody who can mediate those relationships for you.
Well, that's very interesting. And yes, as you said, before getting too far into rewilding the soul, there is a significant amount of healing work that there is to be done, which is why you have all of that healing section up in the front of the book. And I do think it's really important as magical practitioners that we focus on what's inside of us, at least as much as we focus on what we're trying to gain externally or manifest.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think to me, a lot of that is what is mentioned in the charge of the goddess when we talk about things like if what you seek is not within you, then you're not going to find it outside of you, and you have to work on what's inside before you can get too far into external
Absolutely.
things. So yes, there is a lot of healing exercises in the book, and one of those happens to be a soul reintegration. Can you talk about that, and also the parts of the soul and how they work?
Yeah. So I work. I'm going to try to explain this as succinctly as possible, but I work with what is commonly called in a lot of witchcraft settings the three soul model. So the three souls are basically almost like so you have like your talker self, you have your fetch self, and you have your connection to the divine, like a holy daemon. And what they break down to is your talker self is kind of like your ego, your egoic self, the part that may be more rational and trying to interact with the world as we in flesh experience it. The fetch self is more wild, is more animal-like or childlike. It communicates in symbols and representations of things. And it can be hard to communicate between your talker self and your fetch self to open up the lines of communication there. Part of my fairy training was just doing that, like opening up the lines of communication between each soul, and then trying, and figuring out how they communicate with one another. And then there's the holy daemon, which I would say is probably like equivalent to the classical occult holy guardian angel. It is your connection to the divine. It is your soul that is essentially united with all of divinity, with the universe, whatever you want to call it. And then, part of it is just like figuring out how to open up communication with that part of yourself, which classically has been called like knowledge and conversation or something like that. So that's the three souls model. And when I'm talking about like soul reintegration, and I talk a little bit about things like soul shards, where a schism or a traumatic event has created a part of yourself that you have almost calved off to be the piece of yourself that deals with that trauma, whatever it is, so that you in your active daily life don't have to deal with that. And that is like some serious work. And I kind of share in the book that if you're in a space where you have that, where you realize that you have a soul shard based around some traumatic event, that you really need to be working with a professional to sort of work on reintegration, because a professional can help you with that reintegration process. And it's just because it can be so challenging to confront the thing that caused the schism in the first place. I think a lot of us have these sort of things that separate us spiritually, and confronting that is challenging. But so some of the work that I talk about was inspired by Sultram Alion. I don't remember how to say her name, but she's a Buddhist nun, and she has this thing about she wrote a book called Feeding Your Demons. And I was like, well, this is really great. It's in it's in a really Buddhist sense, from a very Buddhist practice. And so I had to make some changes to it to make it feel functional in witchcraft settings. But the idea is essentially that you talk to and and begin a conversation with that part of yourself that is othered, that shadow self, uh, that you've othered in some way. Um, and I'm not like saying like you've done this to yourself, but like as a natural reaction to whatever traumas you've experienced, this is what you had to do to survive, kind of thing. And I get that. So um, it's not like victim blaming at all, at all. But it is, about figuring out the source of that trauma, and rather than othering it and continuing the cycle that has spiritually split you in some way, you start working with it. You start asking it what it wants, asking it what it needs. Maybe it's just recognition that it exists, and that's the part where working with a therapist can be really helpful too, because once you kind of creak open the box, some ugly things can come out, some overwhelming emotion, some so, but over the course of time, you're feeding this demon, or this other part of yourself, what it needs, so that it heals, and eventually you can step into reintegration and come out more whole. And I think that a lot of people would benefit from this work. And I don't feel like you necessarily even have to have had a major trauma to have any benefit or use from this. It's if you have a part of yourself that you don't want to acknowledge, that you feel shame around, that you maybe feel awful about or embarrassed about, or whatever it is, you're not benefiting yourself or anyone else by carrying that around, as you're only going to continue to cycle through the same issues that it creates, because it's there and it's not acknowledged. So it's a super in-depth process to go through, and it can be very challenging. But I think when you start doing that and you start realizing it's possible to reintegrate yourself and to reintegrate these parts of your soul, then you put down the path. You start laying the groundwork. You've walked the path, and it becomes easier to walk that path again in the future. So that the next time you realize that there's something that you are bumping up against that feels uncomfortable, or that you never even realized was challenging for you, you have some experience with doing this work, and therefore have your sort of you've got the toolkit. And that's what I was talking about earlier, when going out and going into the process of rewilding, you might rile up something that you had pushed away decades ago. And by having the practice, the healing end of the practice, you can say, oh, okay, well, I know what I need to do and how I need to do it in order to help process that work before I move forward into more challenging spiritual territory.
Yeah. My wife found the Feeding Your Demons book a few years ago. We love it.
Yeah.
That type of shadow work is super transformative. It's an incredible practice, and it's accessible. It's not hard to start, but it can drastically just shift your way of thinking
Yeah.
and call attention to parts of yourself that need to be loved.
Yeah, exactly.
So I want to jump topics a little bit because I
Sure.
don't want to not talk about mushrooms. And you say some very interesting things about fungi, and I would love to hear about
Yeah.
them.
Yeah, so that was like the surprise hit from my book when I was going, when I did workshops at conferences and stuff. That was the part that really resonated with a lot of people, and I was surprised by that. In some ways, I think with everything, I think like I don't really love pop culture, but it's good to like keep a pulse on it because it does tell you a little bit about what. And like as I mentioned earlier about the zeitgeist, about the spirit of the times, and what the spirit of the times is calling for or needs, can be found in odd places. So I was doing this work with mushrooms a while ago, and and then all of a sudden I start seeing, it's in like the latest Star Trek. I forget what it was called. The Star Trek
Discovery.
Discovery, was it? Yeah. Disco. Yeah. Where they had they had a ship that was able to travel the mycelial network through space. So the mycelial network would be, the what we would think of as the sort of body of the mushroom. Like, so underground, the mycelia trace through the soil, connecting the roots of different plants, and they can be incredible helpers for the plant kingdom. And that's really their body. The thing that the mushrooms that we see sprout up, those are their fruit. So in the way that it's, the underground part is kind of like the tree, and then they pop fruit up to spread spores and reproduce. So, like seeing that in Star Trek Discovery, and then just kind of everywhere. Paul Stamets has been growing in popularity for years and years. He's an amateur mycologist who is probably the most well versed of anyone that I've seen talking about fungi and mushrooms. To the point that one of the characters in Star Trek Discovery was named after him. There's the engineer, I think, named Stamets. So it's and for me, my experience started by just like, as I said earlier, observing. I was just observing my little patch of land, which is not big, and seeing some mushrooms that were sprouting. It's like, I wonder, like they were just sprouting out of some mulch. They were probably carried here from wherever the mulch originally came from. And I just started paying attention, and I noticed that it would come back. It kept coming back in that same spot. And it was slowly migrating towards my door. And so I started just like, after all of that observation, I started reaching out to a little bit just to see, like, who are you? Like, are you like trying to reach out to me? Are you trying to catch my attention? That kind of thing. And as time went on, I did get the impression that that it was trying to catch my attention, that it was, and that like we created a sort of partnership together, working together. I noticed that, a couple of days after a heavy rain, mushrooms would sprout up in that spot. It seems pretty logical. And so I would go out and I would just water that spot if it had been dry for more than a few days, and then lo and behold, a couple of days later, the mushrooms would pop up. So at some point I was like, okay, I think I have an idea. For a talisman, I always do this thing where I ward my house, and I think it's just good practice. I'm not like weird that like people are constantly attacking me or anything, but I think it's just good practice magically to sort of ward your house, ward your car, do the things. I mean, if you have a regular witchcraft magical practice, you probably are familiar with putting shields up around yourself in different environments. So we should be doing the same things with our homes and our vehicles and things like that. So I had this idea though that, where instead of constantly going out and rewarding my home every month or whatever, just refreshing the energy of the wards, maybe I could partner with this mushroom, since mushrooms are great decomposers and then regenerators. So they take negative things out of the, some mushrooms will take negative things out of the environment, like heavy metals, and then transmute them into safe material to be used. So I was like, well, maybe I could do that with, whatever negative energy is coming towards my house, even if it's my neighbor who's just giving me a dirty look because, he doesn't like me. Take that energy, and as soon as it hits the ward of my house, have it feed through the talisman, and then the talisman will take that bad energy and then transmute it into energy that further empowers the wards around my house. And so I kind of like worked with the mushroom and sort of like tried to explain what my idea was in the way that I communicate with spirits. And it was like, yeah. And I was like, in exchange, what I'll do is, make sure that I spread your spores around and keep feeding the, watering the area where you've popped up historically and everything. It was like, yeah, sure, let's do this. So I built that ward, and it's a really effective. I love it because I love any kind of magic that just simplifies my life, and just makes everything that much easier. If I don't have to, if I can be assured that the wards of my house are continually being refreshed, then I don't need to go out and redo them every month. Maybe I can do them every 3 months now, and rely on that a little bit. I feel like magic, that is kind of the point of magic, is sort of to make our lives easier, to remove the obstacles that are in our way, and to free us up to do, to get even deeper into our work.
Yeah, I love it. The way you talk about mushrooms is almost describing them as like nature's little alchemists.
Yeah.
Usually when people say the word transmutation, a lot of times they're talking about some complicated thing in alchemy, but
Right.
we're just talking about mushrooms here. But it makes
Right.
complete sense based on how
Yeah.
they break things down and recycle. And it's a really cool talisman, and I can't wait to do it sometime in the future.
Yeah, let me know how it works.
Yeah.
Or if you come up with any novel new ideas off of that, like I'd love to hear about it.
Okay. Well, hey, in just a second, I'm going to hit you with the signature question. But before I do that, I want to let people know where they can find you online, and where you'll be in person in the near future.
Sure. So you can find me online at moonlithedge.com or nathanmhall.com. I've got lots of links from there to where you can find my book. I've got a Substack that's just moonlithedge.substack.com, and I put out occasional newsletters there. I don't do, most of my newsletters are just sort of short essays. It's not heavy on like promoting products or anything. I don't really sell anything other than books. I've got a box of books I need to get rid of. So if anybody wants those, let me know. And I'll be at this year. I was just at Sacred Space in Baltimore. This summer, I'm going to be at Mystic South, which I'm on the board of, and I'll be doing a workshop there or two, and then I'll be doing a few workshops or a couple workshops at the Temple of Witchcraft Temple Fest this year in Massachusetts. So that's all I've got. I've kind of last year I went to like every event that I could because my book had just launched, and I was like so burnt out by the end of it that I'm like this year I'm like, well, I'm just going to do a couple. So, but yeah, that's where you can find me, and yeah, let me know. Just come out and say hi, and let's talk mushrooms and animism.
Okay, well, if anybody is looking to learn more about Nathan or check out his book, I'm going to post all of those links in the video description below. All you have to do is click. I'll post links to those two festivals as well, so you guys can find out more information. So, Nathan, signature question time. How do you use sound or music in your personal magical practice?
So I grew up, when I was young, in grade school, high school, I was in music and I was in band. And so music has always been a really big part of my life. It's less so as I got older, but a lot of the resonant sounds of the different holy names that I use, the different spirit names that I use, I like to intone them. I like to feel them vibrating through my body, and I like to, like, even in my three soul alignment work, I like to feel, my talker self resonating, kind of in this area, my root self in, or my fetch self sort of resonating up from my root, my connection to my holy guardian angel, my holy daemon, as something like a very high pitched sort of resonance, and that is a lot of how I use sound in my practice. But I've also been, since I've been doing more ritual, I've been pulling in more and more percussion instruments into the work, and different, like I just bought an owl call, so a little call that makes the sound of like a barred owl. And I have another call. These are like hunting calls. I don't go hunting, but I found these things. I'm like, well, I'm going to use these in ritual. I found another call that's like a crow call. And do you know what a bull roarer is?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So the big, the little, it's like a piece of wood. I'm just explaining it for people who don't, on a long rope. And it makes like a really almost kind of spooky noise. Like but it's a really good, for sort of like raising the energy and maybe even like waking up the spirits around you to, let them know of your presence. I have what's called a wind wand that I found at this like percussion and instrument store in San Francisco. That is sort of, it imitates that noise. It's a much smaller device, so I can actually use it when I'm in a hotel conference or whatever. So I don't have to have like a length of 12-foot rope swinging over people's heads. And but yeah, so I'm having a lot of fun pulling that stuff in, and I don't, like, in my walk of witchcraft, I don't see a lot of other people doing that, and I think it's so important, like the importance of song, the importance of sound. Like, it is so fundamental to setting a mood and aligning, your spirit with the resonance of the songs or sounds that you're using. So I really love when anybody does that, and it's something that I'm pulling more and more into my practice as well.
It's really cool the way that you talk about the different parts of the soul having a different feeling in terms of frequency. I can really feel that. For me personally, that I can really get behind that. And nice. What do you call it? A wind wand? That sounds so cool. I'm definitely going to have to look into that. If you guys don't know what a bull roarer sounds like, you can look it up on YouTube. You're probably not going to get the full effect of the sound. It's kind of like a hauntingly low vibration of a swarm of bees. Oscillating. It's a really cool noise. Ancient instrument.
So
I think originally that's really cool.
Australia, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
Very neat. So, I actually want to make one soon.
Nice. Yeah. You'll have to show me how it works, how it sounds. I've never been in the presence of someone actually doing a full-scale bull roar, so I would love to see that demoed.
Okay, you'll have to show me the wind wand.
Okay.
All right. Well, I know we are getting kind of late in our time, Nathan. I just want to say thank you so much for being here on the show again, and I will go ahead and stop the recording now so that you can get on to the rest of your day. Appreciate you. All right.
Thank you. Bye.
Another big M3 thank you to Nathan Hall for taking the time to come on the show with me today and for sharing all of that cool information. In his book, The Path of the Moonlit Hedge, Nathan shares detailed instructions for making a magical talisman out of a mushroom, and it's an excellent exercise. So if you haven't already checked it out, click one of the links in the video description below and grab a copy. Please remember to like and subscribe here on YouTube. You can also follow me on Facebook or Instagram at Eric Arcadian. And if you'd like a shout out in one of my videos like Eric G here, you can also check out my Patreon page. The link will be in the video description below. Remember, there's always a way to make music. Until next time.
It's called Walmart. All the coolest witches buy